In 1873, a cattle drover named Cal Reeves walked into a trading post in Dodge City with three things hidden on his body that modern law enforcement would classify as felonies. He wasn't an outlaw. He wasn't a gunfighter. He was a working man who understood one thing about the American frontier that we've almost completely forgotten. The world was dangerous, and a man who wasn't prepared for that danger was a man who didn't come home. What he carried wasn't unusual. It was ordinary. It was what every man around him carried, what their fathers had carried, and what their grandfathers had carried before the country even had a name. The difference between Carl Reeves and a criminal wasn't what was in his pockets. It was what era he lived in. Number 14 on this list was standard equipment for frontier lawmen, issued by the government, carried on duty, considered essential, until the same government decided civilians couldn't be trusted with it. And number 3 was sold openly at general stores across the frontier for less than $1, no questions asked, sitting right next to the tobacco and the hardtack. Before we start, subscribe, because once you understand what your great-grandfather considered everyday carry, you'll never look at a museum display case the same way again. Let's count them down. Number 25, the weighted poker chip. Walk into any frontier saloon between 1850 and 1900, and you'd find men with chips in their pockets that had nothing to do with gambling. Experienced card players and men who worked the rougher end of the river trade carried poker chips that had been quietly modified. A small cavity drilled into the clay or bone composite, filled with lead shot, resealed flush with the surface. In the palm, a stack of 3 or 4 of these weighed almost nothing. In a closed fist, they gave the same advantage as weighted knuckles, concentrating force without the profile of brass knuckles that frontier sheriffs knew to look for. A man could sit at a card table, palm a small stack, and be ready for whatever the next hand brought, whether that was a winning pot or a dispute over one. The beauty of the weighted chip was deniability. Every man at the table had chips. No one could prove yours were different without a scale, and frontier sheriffs had better things to do than weigh gambling tokens. This was the original concealed carry that didn't look like concealed carry, a weapon hiding inside the most ordinary object in the room. Number 24, the Bowie knife. Jim Bowie didn't invent the knife that carries his name. He just made it famous. At the Sandbar fight of 1827, where he survived being shot, stabbed, and clubbed, before killing a man with a blade that witnesses described as something between a hunting knife and a short sword. After that fight, every blacksmith in the South and West had customers asking for the same design. The Bowie knife was a beast. Blade length ran anywhere from 9 inches to over a foot, thick-spined, clip-pointed, with a crossguard that caught other blades, and a balance that felt like an extension of the arm. Men carried Bowie knives openly on the belt, sheathed in tooled leather. In Texas and Louisiana, the Bowie was the gentleman's sidearm before the revolver became reliable. Lawyers carried them. Ministers carried them on the road between parishes. Then the legislatures came. Mississippi banned Bowie knives in 1837. Alabama followed. Georgia, Tennessee, and Virginia all passed restrictions before the Civil War, making the Bowie one of the earliest targets of American weapons legislation. Not because criminals carried it, because everybody did. The knife that came off the belt went into the boot, and the frontier continued on. Number 23, the sword cane. a gentleman's walking stick, polished hardwood, brass ferrule, carved knob, concealing inside its hollow shaft a blade of 12 to 24 inches, released by a twist of the handle that looked, to any observer, like a man adjusting his grip. The sword cane was a civilization weapon, the tool of merchants, lawyers, bankers, and the class of professional gamblers who cultivated a refined image as part of their trade. A man with a sword cane looked like he didn't need a weapon. That was always the point. Sears, Roebuck, and Company sold them through their mail-order catalog into the early 1900s, listed alongside farm equipment with no more ceremony than a plow attachment. Any man in America with a catalog and $2 could own one. When concealed weapons laws expanded, courts spent decades arguing about whether a sword cane was a cane or a blade. Meanwhile, the men who carried them kept walking. Number 22. The pepperbox pistol. Before the Colt revolver dominated, the most common multi-shot firearm in America was the pepperbox, a cluster of 4 to 6 barrels rotating around a central axis. Pull the trigger, the next barrel rotates forward. No complicated cylinder mechanism, just rotating iron, percussion caps, and 5 more chances if the first one didn't finish it. The pepperbox was notorious for 2 things. First, it was wildly inaccurate. The heavy trigger pull required to rotate the barrels threw the aim off in ways experienced shooters compensated for and beginners paid for. Second, it occasionally fired all barrels simultaneously, a malfunction called a chain fire that turned the shooter's hand into a hazard zone. None of this stopped them from selling by the tens of thousands. Gamblers loved them. Merchants kept them under counters. Mark Twain described the pepperbox in Roughing It as a cheerful weapon, the amusement of the multitude. The men who carried them seriously were not laughing. Number 21. The Apache pistol. This sounds like something from a fever dream, but it was real. Manufactured in quantity and specifically designed to be the most dangerous object that fit inside a closed hand. The Apache pistol was a combination weapon produced in France and Belgium and imported into America in significant numbers between the 1870s and early 1900s. It combined 3 elements in a single folding device: a small pinfire revolver, a knuckle duster grip with finger holes cast directly into the frame, and a fold-out blade of 3 to 4 inches. The whole package folded into something roughly the size of a large pocket watch. Unfolded, it was simultaneously a firearm, brass knuckles, and a knife. A man in a close-quarters confrontation could shoot, punch, and cut without changing weapons. The Apache was designed for environments where fights happened at arm's length and ended in seconds. American law enforcement encountered them frequently in cities with large immigrant populations and in frontier towns where the men who built railroads brought their own ideas about what a man should carry. The weapon was banned repeatedly. It kept appearing anyway. Number 20. The bludgeon cane. Not a sword cane, not a walking stick that happened to be heavy. The bludgeon cane was built from the beginning for exactly one purpose, with no pretense of being anything else to anyone who knew what they were looking at. American craftsmen in the 1800s made bludgeon canes from the densest available hardwoods: Osage orange, ironwood, black locust. Woods so heavy they sank in water, and so hard they rang like metal when struck against stone. The head was carved into a bulbous knob, sometimes lead inlaid, sometimes the natural swelling of a root ball, selected specifically because it was already weighted by nature. Frontier lawmen carried them when they didn't want the escalation a drawn firearm produced. Stagecoach guards used them for crowd control at depots. Mountain men who lived months from the nearest gun shop found them more reliable than any mechanism that could rust, freeze, or misfire. The bludgeon cane was never banned because it was never officially classified as anything other than a walking stick, a classification that was legally accurate and practically absurd in equal measure. Number 19. The Derringer. Henry Derringer built his first pocket pistol in Philadelphia in the 1820s. By the 1860s, the design had been copied by dozens of manufacturers, and the Derringer had become the defining concealed carry weapon of the frontier era. It was small. That was the point. A single or double-shot pistol chambered in a caliber that wouldn't win a fight at distance, but would end one at arm's length. It fit into a vest pocket, a boot top, or a gambler's sleeve holster with equal ease. Not a fighting weapon, a last resort weapon. Something to produce when the situation had already gone wrong, and the only remaining question was who would walk away. John Wilkes Booth carried a .44 caliber single-shot Derringer on April 14th, 1865. That night gave the Derringer a reputation it spent decades trying to outlive. Pawn shops in mountain towns kept them in glass cases next to pocket watches and wedding rings, priced between $5 and $15, available to any man with the cash. No license, no waiting period, no paperwork beyond the transaction itself. Number 18. The Slungshot. A lead ball wrapped in braided rawhide on a short, flexible handle. The most commonly banned weapon in 19th century American legal history, outlawed in more states than brass knuckles, blackjacks, and switchblades combined. The reason was simple. It worked, and it required nothing to make. Smooth river stones from any creek bed, wrapped in rawhide cut from any barn, braided with the same skill that went into horsetack. A man who could braid a rein could make a slungshot in an afternoon. The flexible handle absorbed the recoil on the wielder's wrist while multiplying velocity at the striking end, concentrating the weight of a lead ball into an impact area smaller than a silver dollar. State after state banned them through the mid to late 1800s. The bans produced almost no reduction in use because production was so simple, enforcement was effectively impossible. Every ban on the slungshot was a law against a concept, and concepts don't respond to legislation. Grandfathers who kept them in coat pockets rarely mentioned them. The slungshot spoke for itself on the occasions when it spoke at all. Number 17. The push dagger. The push dagger is one of the most mechanically efficient close-quarters weapons ever designed. The handle crosses the palm horizontally. The blade extends forward between the middle and ring fingers. Every ounce of a forward punch drives that point into the target rather than dissipating across the surface of a fist. The design found its American chapter with riverboat gamblers and Mississippi steamboat culture in the mid-1800s. Men who worked or traveled the river needed something compact, concealable, and effective in cramped interior spaces, narrow corridors, tiny cabins, gambling rooms, where raising an arm for a full swing meant hitting the ceiling or a bystander. The push dagger was 3 inches long, fit in a watch pocket, required no swing, no backlash, no space. Tennessee outlawed it before 1880. Other states followed. The design was so simple, a blade, a crosspiece, a grip, that no ban eliminated it. Any blacksmith with scrap iron and an afternoon could make a functional one. The law made them illegal. It didn't make them disappear. Number 16. The knuckle duster, 4 finger holes cast from brass, iron, or carved from hardwood, by craftsmen who understood a fundamental truth about human biology. The hand is strong, but the bones inside it are fragile. And anything that protects those bones while concentrating force multiplies what a man can deliver without destroying himself in the process. On the frontier, blacksmiths forged custom sets fitted to individual hands, some with pointed studs, others smooth and rounded for courthouse towns where a man might need to explain himself the next morning. The earliest bands came in the 1880s, driven by the same moral reform movements targeting alcohol and gambling. The effect on actual possession was approximately zero. Pawnshops kept them in cigar boxes under the counter. Flea market vendors knew which pocket to reach into. The knuckle duster was the weapon that refused to die, no matter how many laws were written against it, because the men who owned one didn't consider it a crime. They considered it common sense. Number 15. The hideout revolver. The full-size Colt single-action army was the gun that won the West. Or so the mythology insists. What the mythology leaves out is that most working men of the frontier era found it too large, too conspicuous, and too slow to draw in the close quarters situations where they actually needed a firearm. The hideout revolver filled that gap. Smaller caliber, shorter barrel, designed to live in places a full-sized revolver couldn't reach. Coat pockets, vest pockets, shoulder holsters under suit jackets, specially designed pockets sewn into coat linings by tailors who understood what their customers actually carried. Remington, Smith & Wesson and Colt all produced pocket revolvers for this market. Wells Fargo messengers carried them as backup to their shotguns. Gamblers carried them as backup to their main pistols. Women heading west on wagon trains carried them as their primary because the Derringer's one shot felt like too little and the full-sized revolver felt like too much weight. When concealed, carry laws tightened through the late 1800s. The hideout revolver was one of the first casualties. Too small to be obviously necessary, too concealable to survive the suspicion that came with concealment. Number 14. The blackjack. A flat piece of leather sewn around a lead weight, small enough to disappear in a coat pocket, heavy enough to end a confrontation with a single swing. The blackjack was a weapon of enclosed spaces. Mining camp security offices, railroad depot waiting rooms, the back rooms of saloons where disputes were settled away from witnesses. The professional grade was made by saddle makers who understood load distribution. The lead weight molded to fill the leather pocket perfectly, stitched with waxed thread that wouldn't give under impact. A clean strike concentrated enormous energy into a small area, producing results that ranged from stunning to permanent depending on location and force. Frontier law enforcement adopted the blackjack early. County sheriffs issued them to deputies working mining camps, where firearms meant constant escalation risk. The logic was straightforward. A blackjack could stop a man without necessarily killing him, which kept paperwork manageable. The same weapon was simultaneously the favored tool of the men those deputies were trying to control. Bans came state by state through the middle of the 20th century. Departments stopped issuing them. Deputies who had carried them for 20 years quietly put them in desk drawers. The blackjack didn't disappear because it stopped working. It disappeared because it worked too well, and that was eventually considered the problem. Number 13. The Bowie pistol.